Welcome to this Fane online event with the wonderful Roxy Dunn, whose debut is published on the 4th of April,
Correct.
as young as this. So hello, Roxy, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, rested from my Easter bank holiday weekend.
Excellent. Um, I wondered if before we get into talking about the book, if you could talk a little bit about what you were doing before you wrote the book.
Yes, so this is sort of referenced in my bio, but I had a career previously as an actor. So I trained as an actor and worked as an actor for about a decade. And I was doing sort of bit parts on television, and then I took some plays up to the Edinburgh Fringe, not unlike the character Margot in my book. And then it was off the back of that that I started writing some things for sort of pitching ideas for television. But I was finding myself in a bit of a rut, and some of these were, this is quite a long answer. Did you want the long
Yes,
time I came
yes,
to write this novel? Yeah.
definitely.
So yes, so I was feeling a bit sort of frustrated by that process of pitching ideas, but they were sort of getting options, some of them. So the idea was being bought, but then they weren't being further developed or commissioned by channels to be made. And I sort of took stock, and I was thinking, oh, I'm not, what am I doing? And then it was sort of around this time that I realized I wasn't actually watching a huge amount of television, which was the medium I was actually trying to write for at the time.
Mm.
I realized I was just doing loads of reading. So I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe that's a sign I should, try going in that direction. So I ended up writing a first book that nobody wanted. So that was sort of my learning curve and figuring out, yeah, really how to write a book. And then this time it's take two, and it's being published. So hooray!
And could we talk a little bit about Margot and kind of the premise of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So now I don't think this is giving away any spoilers. No, so it's about a 34-year-old single woman called Margot, who essentially is looking back over her life through each of her past relationships. So each man is a different chapter in the book. And she's really trying to work out how she's got to this point in her life and whether or not to go ahead with this life-altering decision she's on the cusp of making.
Okay. So she's 17 at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, so she starts at 17. Well, sorry, right at the beginning, because it's sort of bookended by her present day self at age 34. So she starts and ends at 34, and then she goes back very quickly. So sort of the prologue and epilogue, she's 34, and then chapter 1, she's 17, and then she ages throughout.
Okay, and how many men does she date?
How many men?
I maybe chose the verb date very carefully.
Yeah, no, nice phrasing. Actually, much to the annoyance of my friend who thought it should be a symmetrical 12, there are only 11 men.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there a reason for that, or it just felt right?
12 felt a bit neat, actually. Although it's ironic because this idea, one of the inspirations of how this book first came about was I had this idea of this image of this woman sat around this sort of long wooden table with each of her exes, and there were 12 of them. It was sort of like a Last Supper scene, and she'd gathered them all together. I did actually write this version, but it very quickly got axed and became the current version. And then she did this big reveal that she was pregnant by Immaculate Conception. And then I sent it to a friend, and she said, yeah, I think you've actually got 2/3 of a good book here, which was each of the men as a different chapter. But then she said, you need to lose the magical realism bit. So then I went back and revised into the current ending that we have.
That would have been such a different book.
Yeah, no, it was. Well, actually, it was surprisingly similar in some senses, the sort of first 2/3 of it. And then, very different ending.
So of the 11 men, have you got a favorite? I
Ooh.
do.
Okay, go on. I'd love to hear your answer.
Okay, so the nicest person, I think, is Frank.
Oh, now I think some early readers have commented on Frank being their favorite.
Malik is probably like the funniest to read about. And then I think Wren is my least favorite.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, I hear you. Yeah, valid. I welcome the feedback. I think my favorite would be Oliver.
Oh, thank God you didn't say Wren. That would be really awkward.
No, maybe most fun to write, but no, I think Oliver for the favorite character. Yeah.
And Oliver, not to kind of give away too much, but there's a kind of a continuing friendship there, isn't there? Like,
Yeah, exactly. He sort of spans, but once she meets him, he spans the rest of the book with her because they stay friends, and yeah, so he's sort of like it stays as a constant in her life, although more of a peripheral one.
Can we talk a bit about Malik? What did she get up to with Malik?
Well, you know, I mean, you've read the book, yeah. Some late night escapades at Rio's in Kentish Town,
Okay.
which
And
I've never been to, but did do somebody had uploaded onto like a Google account of maybe it was a Reddit thing, and it gave me quite a lot of detail actually in terms of their experience there. So that was very useful.
I think we've got to assume that people watching this maybe aren't as worldly as we think, because I haven't heard of Rio's. We're going to have to tell everyone what Rio's is.
Yes. For those who are listening who are unfrequented with Rio's, it is a nudist spa in North London, which Margot unwittingly goes to, not realizing that it is a nudist spa, and then wonders.
Yeah, I totally believe that Margot didn't know what it was, but I think, doesn't Malik say, "Do you want to go to a sauna?" And it's late. Like,
I think he says, "Do you want to go to a place that stays at?" I don't remember. Do you want to go to a late night place that I don't know?
no, I think he does reference it being either a spa or a sauna. He's not
Oh.
pretending it's a bar. Like, it's not like,
Okay.
oh, the pub's closed, let's just go and have a drink here.
The thing is, Lily references this, doesn't she? In some senses, she's quite green, Margot. In other senses, she's quite worldly, but in other senses, she is a bit of a naive.
So Lily, we should explain, is her friend from drama school.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah,
And Margot feels slightly ambivalent towards Lily, but I'm not sure that's necessarily about Lily. I think Margot, she kind of, in terms of friendship, she kind of wants intimacy, but also sometimes doesn't. Like, I think she wants to be quite separate, doesn't she, in some ways?
Yeah, I think so. Early on when they meet at drama school, I think Lily is sort of trying to push a closer relationship than Margot wants, and then she sort of has that, they have that falling out, and she says something like, it's nothing to do with you personally. I just don't fare well having intense close female friendships, or something like that. And then after that, they sort of get back together again as friends, and then they are in each other's lives throughout the rest of the novel, actually. And it sort of is one of her main strands, and one of her main relationships throughout the book. And she even references, at the end, that she's looking back, and she says, actually, bar all of the men, apart from I think just the first one, who's pre-drama school, Lily's actually been there as this constant, right?
Yeah. And were there things you wanted to say about female friendship?
Yeah, I think I sort of wanted to, because I think female friendship is sort of undeniably present in the book in terms of Lily, Ishani to a lesser degree, but still, very much so. And then actually Romilly, because even though they're sisters, they're very close in age, and they do have, it feels like a friendship, their relationship. So I think it was a massive kind of to female friendship. I mean, I really wanted to show that support that Margot gets from that, and also in her decision whether or not to become a parent. They're there for her. They offer to go to the meeting with her, the clinic, and you get the sense that if Margot goes ahead with it, they're going to be very involved in her and this child's life if she ends up having one. But I suppose I was really careful not to. I wanted to show the nuance of female friendship, so I was careful not to kind of veer away from discussing and it's sort of showing the jealousies and the insecurities and the comparisons that she has, as a result of those relationships. And because I think they are present in female friendships. I mean, I think it would be amazing to be that close to other women and not to feel those, and particularly in the case of Lily, where they're sharing the same career ambitions. I think the competition invariably becomes a part of it, so it's how they navigate their friendship alongside that.
Should we hear a little bit? I think it might be nice.
Yes. So I'll read from the openings. This is the prologue. The men. You press your phone to your ear to hear Lily over the noise of the restaurant. I maybe definitely shouldn't ask this, she says, but obviously you're going to anyway. You smile as she pauses and think she's probably smiling too. Do you regret any of them? You've been asking yourself this same question. Until now, you'd always pictured them like stepping stones, each man since you were 17, leading you closer to your ultimate endpoint. So how did you get here? It's almost funny given your strategic approach to finding someone you want to do this with. Weirdly, I don't think I do. You lean your head back against the padded leather booth as you glance at the clock and count 14 hours and 16 minutes until tomorrow's appointment. I probably should, but it's just, well, it feels kind of hard to regret love. What about the ones you weren't in love with, though? Okay, are you goading me into regret? Lily laughs and then says quickly, I'm just curious. I actually think it's great you don't regret them. It's hard to know which of them to regret. As you say this, a couple of candidates immediately spring to mind. Even if I took one out, would it have changed anything, or would I still be in the same place? Juicy hypothetical. I got a fishbone stuck in my throat the other day, and it made me think about that medic I used to date. Luke. Good memory. Good memory. And how much more useful it would be if I'd ended up with a doctor instead of a product marketing manager. George is better, though, even if you do end up choking to death. Sweet. Speaking of which, this is precisely the worst timing, but he's just walked through the door with dinner. Can I call you back once we've eaten? Don't worry, the locksmith should be calling any minute. But that's not the call you're waiting for. Not really. You know you can stay here tonight, right? Thanks, but I think I need to be by myself. All right, but don't go having one of those dark nights of the soul. Or actually, maybe this merits one. I promise to indulge in moderation. As you hang up, you check your phone for any missed calls. It's still not too late for Noah to ring. This thought has been playing on a loop since Friday, like a lyric or a jingle designed to sell you hope. It wouldn't need to be dramatic. You'd rather it wasn't. You wish you could insert yourself into his body and make the moves for him, open his pronounced bow lips to say the words, you don't actually need to do this because I want to do it with you. At the table opposite, a little girl in a checkered pinafore dress and gold hoop earrings is staring admirably at you. Staring admiringly at you, her dark eyes large and doll-like. You've done nothing other than misplace your door key and drink sugared tea these last couple of minutes, making you nervous and undeserving of the attention. It's not even as though your situation is all that rare or unusual. Countless women make this choice every day. So why does it feel so surprising? Like stepping out of a cool, dry plane and being hit by a cloud of hot, humid air. The little girl is still staring at you as her parents photograph themselves posing with their drinks. Shutting your eyes, you hear the grill from the open kitchen hiss as meat touches it. The scraping of chairs on the mosaic tiled floor makes your spine momentarily judder. It still doesn't make sense to you. This wasn't meant to be part of your story.
I was thinking a little bit about Margot's background, and it's quite conspicuous that it seems really normal to me. And particularly, I think her grandmother references that her parents are kind of conspicuously well off, which is actually really unusual, I think, in fiction. And I think later on, Margot maybe comments on the kind of families that you read about in children's books. They're either really impoverished or, princesses. Quite unusual just to have family that's comfortable. And I wondered if that was, that's just a coincidence, or if that was something deliberate that you were thinking about.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make. That was a really conscious choice, actually. When I started writing this book, this is quite a long answer to get back to that. I was really I wanted to, so I was struck by this idea, and it seemed to be this sort of like collective conversation I kept having with women in their early 30s, where lots of us had been sort of proactively dating and having relationships, and then still found ourselves in a situation where we were without a partner and wanting to have children. And the bit that I was really interested in was how you could have this narrative that you sort of clung really tightly to, that society had fed you, and that you sort of just thought, well, that's sort of a given. Like, I've grown up in this really, sort of nuclear family. Not that everybody had that I was speaking to, but the majority of people had grown up relatively comfortably, had this sort of template from their parents. And it just felt like this assumption that they too would get those things. And then it felt almost sort of shocking, the fact that so many of these women were in this situation. So I thought it was actually more dramatic to take a scenario in which she had that, like I said, that support network and that total template of this nuclear family, and that really it was just like I said, it was almost a given that she thought she'd get these things. And I thought that was actually heightened by having that as her immediate backdrop. Rather than, like I said, sort of a scenario which might have made those things more less expected, and also enabled me to really hone in on the fact that she chooses to be, you know, going ahead to choose to be a single parent would be the hardest part. This was something I read when I started to research this. One of the women had written on a blog that the hardest thing about it was letting go of the narrative that she'd be doing it with someone. And that isn't to say that all the other factors, like the cost of doing it by yourself and the difficulty of doing it by yourself, all those sort of other more practical factors don't come into the book. And I reference them in passing, but I wanted the book to be about this idea of having to let go of a narrative. And again, by having that support network of the family, she references the fact that her parents offer to pay towards the £3 of treatment, sorry, the 3 rounds of treatment. And you get the sense
That'd be amazing if it was £3.
Yeah, you get the sense that they'll, you know, probably help out with some childcare. I mean, they're not loaded, but they're comfortably sort of well off and middle class, aren't they? Again, it just allowed me to focus on the letting go of this narrative as opposed to these other factors that might have become more prominent otherwise.
Yeah, I think it is quite bold. I was interviewing a quite established American novelist last week, and she was saying how British culture is so kind of built on envy, and it's quite bold to write about someone who isn't calling obviously on our sympathies because they've had a really hard start in life. I think it's, you know,
Yeah,
unusual.
Yeah, I actually, again, it was something I felt really strongly about wanting to write a book where sort of, I'd read so many books with characters who had this sort of like trauma background. And again, I really didn't want, and I did have some early feedback and somebody said, I think you ought to give her some of that. And I just thought, no, because what I'm trying to say that's dramatic is someone who, she even references it herself in one of the chapters, she's had every head start at happiness and then still finds herself in this situation. And to me, that was the bit that was the most surprising that I wanted to hone in on.
Yeah, and exactly that. It enables you to focus in on that without kind of socioeconomic distractions, I think.
Yeah.
I think it'd be good to talk a little bit about her dad, who is, because he's a bit unusual, isn't he?
Yeah, well, yeah, because like I said, you know, whilst I wanted to show this loving support network, I also wanted to show a family that was, I mean, first of all, that I even had an interest in writing, because I you know, you've got to create drama or at least comedy with a scene to move it right forwards. And so I think I did want to have scenes that it wasn't just happy families the whole way. And, you know, and he's eccentric, and there is a sort of, there's a tug there with him and Margot, and it's not a idyllic sort of you know, daddy's little girl scenario by any means. And so I think that just sort of helped in terms of giving her, you know, making it more complex as a family unit, so it could still be loving and supportive and warm, but actually not dull and boring to read for a start, right?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't at one point he say that he never found her or her sister very interesting?
Yeah.
I think because her mum is really kind of indulgent, isn't she, and like supportive, so it balances out, you know.
Yes, I suppose that's right. Yeah, you could look at it as the whole package. Yeah.
No, it did make me laugh, that conversation they had, and she's like, "Are you being serious?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I can never."
Yeah, sort of teenage angst. Yeah.
I wondered, were there writers that you were inspired by?
Yeah, so I mean, there are writers that I adore and will just read, you know, all of their books. Whether I'm not sure if they're direct inspirations, but the writers I love, sort of the ones that spring to mind, would be Elizabeth Strout, Sally Rooney, Sigrid Nunez. And I'm not, like I said, I don't think you'd necessarily think, oh yeah, those are writers that she's reading to have written that. But each of those writers do something for me in different ways. And I suppose what they all have in common is just, there's just a real honesty. And I think, you know, I think that's what it actually comes down to. They've got quite distinct styles, those three, but there's an honesty in what they're saying. And I think particularly actually with Sigrid Nunez, I find her very funny because I find her to be very blunt, and I find that very enjoyable. And yeah, and I think Sorrow and Bliss, again, like that would be a huge inspiration, yeah, for the book.
I'm just thinking, as you kind of mentioned, that it's written, so it's not first person.
It's not, no, correct.
It's second person.
Second, yeah.
Yeah, which the only novel that I can think of that I've read like that is Jay McInerney's Bright Lights Big City. I mean, it's quite rare, isn't it?
Yeah. That was one, because when I first got the well, it wasn't really an idea. I first heard it in the second person, and I thought, oh,
That's
that's
really deep.
I first heard it. I'm like, what actually is weird, because I don't think of myself as a very sort of what's the word, in no, spiritual's too much. I suppose intuitive writer, but I suppose in this sense I was, because I had this real instinct to write it in second, but then I sort of pushed it down because I thought that's really weird and people don't do that. And so I started Googling books in the second person, and sorry, but was it big bright lights, big city?
Quite like Big City,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
I think that's right, yeah.
as an example, but I thought, no, I think, look, if it's the first book, I really ought to try and stick to something that's a bit more done. So I wrote it all in the third person. I sent it to an early reader friend, and then she wrote back saying, oh, I felt quite detached from Margot. So why isn't it in first? So I sort of played around with it, and I wrote out the opening section, well, not the section I just read you, but the first chapter, the first man, in all three narrative viewpoints, and sort of held them up against each other. But yeah, I mean, she'd basically already said third isn't really working. I'm feeling quite detached. And then first just felt quite sort of, I found Margot a bit annoying in first person. There was something that was almost too indulgent, because she's quite indulgent anyway as a character. Having her in first, this I voice repeatedly, just didn't really work. So I thought, all right, second it is. I'm just gonna have to do it. So then I did put it all into second, and yeah, and then I think there's that interesting thing with second, isn't there? Because did you read it and hear it as Margot talking to herself, or did you become the you character?
I think it kind of moved around a bit.
Oh, okay.
At some points. Yeah. There's something it does make it a bit more detached, doesn't it? In a way, than like I, you know.
The you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose it's how each person reads it, because I think, I mean, some people have sort of said it read like, you know, a diary entry for them, but I imagine these are perhaps people who maybe address themselves in the second person, so then it reads like you know, somebody talking to themselves. In some ways it can be quite immersive, and get you sort of in. Yeah, I don't know, I just, because actually now I am thinking that didn't the Lisa Tadado book, Three Women, didn't Maggie, the first character, start off as you? Because I think it did, and I remember that. But then it moved, but that just gripped me off. And I found the you quite easy to be immersed in, but then it is a taste thing ultimately. And I actually address myself in the second person when I talk to myself. So I think rather than you know, if I have things I need to do, I'll say, Roxy, go, you do this now, rather than I will go and do this. So I think it's quite familiar to me, the second person, in that sense.
I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but it sounds a bit like you're talking to yourself as though you're a puppy. Like, you must now.
You go now, you. Well, it's a lot of time alone as a writer. I mean, you know this.
Yeah, totally. And actually, I think that might be quite fruitful. Because I'm sure some people watching this are either writing books or trying to write books. If you could talk a little bit about your routine, like how did you get it done?
Yes.
The sharp intake of breath.
Well, so with this book, it was fast, the first draft, because don't forget, I had come off the back of writing a book that was nobody wanted, that I didn't sell. In fact, I didn't even get an agent from it, actually. I got some full manuscript requests from several agents, but nobody signed me off the back of it. So I felt like I was sort of back to square one. And at the time, just before I started writing this and I got the idea, I mean, I was sort of, you know, researching law conversion courses and editorial assistant positions at publishing houses, and I mean, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And then when I got this idea, I just thought, okay, I'm going to just roll with it. I'm not even going to think about whether or not there's any wisdom in trying again with this. So I wrote just, but it didn't require a huge amount of discipline, because when I have an idea, it is that most sort of flow state that I'm in. So that was sort of the first 3 to 4 months, I was just rolling with it. But then once I had that draft, and it then became things like having to rework the end, to change the ending, and then just into this sort of edits. I mean, that bit was quite laborious, and really that was just discipline, just going, right, I'm going to, I mean, very conveniently, right, the book is divided into these neat chapters, so that it was easy for me to go, right, today I do Elliot, tomorrow I do, you know, whichever man's after Elliot. Oh God, I've got to a long chapter now with the long man. Long man. But yeah, so it was a combination of sort of real desire to write coupled with, I don't really, this feels like I'm so far away from it, but I'm just going to have to knuckle down and do it. And at points it was painstaking, and I had a spreadsheet with all the different characters and where they were at each age, and you know, because where Margot was living, and then was Romilly pregnant, had she met Alec, you know, where had she moved to London from Oxford, just keeping track of them all. And then I do remember on some of my most, you know, tedious days just going, I will not write a book that spans 17 years again. Not that 17 years is actually that many years compared to some people, but it's also possible to write a book where you follow characters for a year. And I thought, maybe I'll do that next time. So I don't have to keep track.
Yeah, or a day. You know.
A day, sure. Yeah.
You could do like you know, like 24, the Keith Sutherland program. You could do like an hour.
Right, yeah.
But let's get down a bit more into the nitty gritty. So like on a day that you're writing, you get up, then what happens?
So on a good writing day, which to be fair, I'll just openly acknowledge I haven't had for a while, at least a few months now, because I've been more focused on the publicity for this. And I also teach, I lecture at a university part-time. So during term time, I'm required there quite a bit. But on a non-term time, ideal writing day, I tend to work from the library. So I'll get there for, it's not that early because it doesn't open till 9.
So the British Library?
No, the Hackney Central.
Okay.
Yeah, which is just a short walk from my house. And then I would write there.
So longhand or?
No, I don't write anything longhand. I write
You're holding a pen.
It's just a prop. Useless to me. Yeah, no, always on the laptop, or actually phone notes I sometimes do, and then it converts to, it's just naturally on the laptop because it goes from my app on the phone to the laptop. So I might write things or record things, and then it will be there the next day when I open up the laptop, providing it's synced. I've had a few issues where it hasn't. Yeah, so write 9 till 12 or 1, and then come home for lunch, and then probably won't be able to do much more after that. It will be sort of 2 o'clock. I'll be post lunch slump, and I don't, if I've had a good morning doing it, it's very rare for me to be able to do it for more than 4 or so hours. So yeah, then the afternoon is just given over to other things.
And then are you quite strict about like not looking at Instagram or whatever whilst you're writing? Are you quite?
I used to be. I was known amongst some of my friends as being amazingly disciplined, and unfortunately, I think what happened was I came on social media because of the book coming out, whereas I had this lovely window where I wasn't on any of it when I was just writing, and I was just much more productive. But it's also part of the job, and you know, I'm pleased to be doing the other bit as well. But I'm not as disciplined as I used to be, and I do sometimes just turn my phone on airplane actually. Which I find, you know, useful. So then it's like blotting the world out. Occasionally you miss an email, but it's rare they're that time sensitive.
No, absolutely. I've got a friend who's a novelist, and she puts her phone in a drawer.
That's very disciplined, yeah.
Yeah.
And you actually have to walk up, you know, to get it and know you're
well, it's kind of both disciplined, but it's also kind of maybe accepting that you aren't very disciplined if you have to.
Yeah, you're right.
But do you redraft a lot, or do you tend to write quite slowly and then not redraft?
No, redraft a lot, yeah. So my first drafts are quite scant on detail. I'm sort of like notoriously bad at any form of scene description or setting. I mean, you know, my agent is, you know, known to write in the margins of my manuscripts. Could we get even a suggestion of where they might be, inside, outside, in space? Like, I'm just all about the dialogue and the sort of internal monologue and the thoughts and the observations, but not scene setting. Yeah, so I often have to go back and add that. And yeah, no, I have to add quite a lot because I sometimes just don't go deep enough actually. And this is why it's so useful now having an editor and my agent to sort of say, can we have more here? Like, because then I get led by their likes and preferences, because I sort of think, oh, lovely, I've got this thing that exists that I really like. I've seemed to have got down what I wanted to say. but it's just so narrow-minded, right? Because it's just in my brain. So then, you know, they were so good with this. The early versions of As Young as This was really focused on the men. I mean, even more so than it is. There was hardly any stuff with the family and Lily and Ashani, and they just kept saying, we really want more of the family and the friends, you know, like we know it's about the men, but like, come on, she's got to have some relationships outside of this. So yeah, there was a lot of redrafting that went on with this. I mean, I have no idea what this printed version is, but it must be draft 14 or something. Yeah.
Okay.
I said, having no idea, that then sounded amazingly specific. 14 or thereabouts, I don't know.
And you were saying that kind of you experience a slight reluctance to kind of scene set. Do you think that comes from having worked as an actor where you're really thinking about the dialogue a lot? You know, you're not thinking about what the set necessarily looks like so much.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And just sort of what naturally interests me. And when I read, I don't really read description. I mean, I fresh way interesting and different. I'm just not that interested in it, and I'll sort of skip a few lines if it's like describing the trees and the, you know, I'm just, it's where my interest naturally dialogue and their thoughts and observations. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where I'm not good at doing it, and it does other people do it, even if they do it very well. Yeah, I'm sure that comes from my background in screenwriting and playwriting.
I'm a big fan of novelists playing to their strengths. Like there's something you in this instance, it's not something that you can't do, but sometimes there are things that novelists can't do, and then I think don't do it, you know.
Oh, do you know? Sorry, yeah.
So, for example, there's a novelist called Julie Meyerson, and I think her first book, I think maybe it's called Fat Man and Me. I might have got that wrong, but in her earliest books, she wrote incredibly short scenes because she didn't know how to end scenes. So she just decided to keep them really brief. And in fact, the effect is quite chic and quite kind of stylish. But it was because she was tackling like in some ways a deficit, like because her lack of experience or lack of knowledge. And she's really open about it. She told me this. I'm not just inferring it from the way the book came out. And I think there's a strong argument for, you know, yeah, playing to your strengths.
I completely agree with that. And actually I had this just sort of revelatory moment with my editor when we were really stuck on the prologue, because the section I've just read to you was, well, entirely different from the Last Supper version, but then also entirely different upon this idea of her on the phone waiting, will Noah call, will she or will she not go ahead with this decision? It just wasn't working. And it was the one bit of the book my editor said, I don't like it. It's not reflective of the rest of the book. And it's so early on that, you know, it's the bit people are going to be picking up in bookshops and, you know, buying it or not buying it as a result of it. And we couldn't work it out. And then finally she said, hey, can you get on a call? And she said, I've worked it out. She said, you're describing the restaurant, and that's not what you do well. You do dialogue well. Just get her on the phone with somebody. And I was like, oh, cool. She can have a phone with Lily then, you know. So and you know, and that's such a gift as a writer when somebody can tell you something like that, because maybe I knew it, but yet I hadn't managed to apply it directly to what I'm doing. And to have an editor who not only can tell you when something isn't working, but then provide a solution is just so wonderful.
Yeah, and I think there's a big strength in agents and editors bringing out what is there, posing.
Yeah.
You know, I wondered if you're writing anything new.
Yeah, I am. I'm working on my new book. I mean, it's relatively early days, so I'm not like going to say loads about it, but
come on, tell us.
In a nutshell, another 30-something-year-old woman, big surprise there, this time entering into a non-monogamous relationship and trying to navigate that and work out the parameters of that.
So she's going to be going to Rio's.
Well, maybe, yeah. As long as it takes place within a year, she can do anything, yeah. Keeping the time frame slim this time. Yeah, and sort of looking at attachment styles, and I suppose the thing I'm interested in looking at is whether love can ever offer safety. I think that's sort of the central thing that I'm working with. But that sounds very serious, and I'm also hopefully it's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have many fears about how you're going to cope with the publishing process, but I think someone more cautious might say it's good that this book's coming out first, because if your first book's about having non-monogamous relationships and you're a woman, like, you're going to get a lot of people saying, so the research for this,
Yeah.
which
So
maybe could be challenging the first time round. I think so. We've just hit over 45 minutes. I think that's probably most of my questions. Oh, actually, should we talk about why it's called As Young as This?
sure, yes. So this was not the original title. As with the alternate ending, the original title was Not Your Ending, actually. I was really just hammering home this idea of, this ending that she wants and then, doesn't get. But various people thought it ought to change, and I agreed. So we were brainstorming. This was my agent, myself, my editor, editorial assistant, possibly, I think, sales and marketing. There was a group of us. And we were sort of, all contributing titles into a document. And then this was a line, I think I originally suggested this, but it was a longer version. It was, there's a line 2/3 of it was relatively near the end, where Margot says she's watching the little girl in the restaurant. I'm trying to say this without giving spoilers. And she says it starts as young as this, because the little girl is watching Margot. And she looks across at her and says, it starts as young as this, the fantasy where the prince comes to the rescue. And I like the idea of, it's quite done, but pulling a title from a phrase within the book. But then, as I think it was my assistant editor rightly pointed out, it starts as young as this. It's very long. So how about just as young as this? And I really liked it. It felt different, actually, in the way, and different enough in the way it was phrased. Had that kind of shiny word young in it, the one that people would sort of remember, because I think as and this are a bit vague. And yeah, so it seemed to sort of encapsulate the theme of the book as well really nicely.
Thank you so much, Roxy Dunn. I'm Alex Peake Tomkinson, and this has been an online event with Fane.